Hello, and welcome to the Punchline's 2013 Mailbag episode. Let's get started. I can. Mailbag time! How is the Heroes Academy going? Actually, there's not a ton going on the server right now. Everybody's going off in different directions, building their different projects, some of which are actually super impressive, and I might show you at some point. But there's not been a whole lot of progression in the terms of story. The Withered have been attacking or making surprise, visits once in a while, but the Sundered haven't showed up at all. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then go see this video here, or just, look for it. And actually, as long as we're talking about it, an interesting thing happened that I kind of want to clear up. I called it Counter Monkey initially, and used the Counter Monkey title card and music as a tribute or as a sign of respect. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery to the original Counter Monkey videos done by Spoony, because I thought it wouldn't be a real Counter Monkey if I didn't do that. But I apparently was very, very wrong, because a lot of people got very upset with the fact that I was using Spoony's idea. And here's the thing: I look at the idea of a Counter Monkey and the same sort of idea as a Let's Play. Nobody owns the idea of a Let's Play. Nobody says, PewDiePie, for instance, is the only guy who can do Let's Plays. Everybody can do Let's Plays, from PewDiePie to Angry Joe to the Yogscast to Team 4-Star to whoever. Nobody owns a Let's Play, and I sort of think that a Counter Monkey is the same sort of thing. It's, a retelling of, role-playing events, which is, I think, a great idea. You see a Let's Play video, and you know what a Let's Play is. You see a Counter Monkey video, and you know what a Counter Monkey is. That was my initial idea, my initial thought. You can comment on that, share your opinion, tell me that I'm an idiot and that I'm wrong. Now, people certainly did the first time around. It's my most disliked video, actually, for that very reason. But I learned my lesson for the next time around, and the Chronicles of the Heroes Academy is its own thing now. But there's not really a whole lot going on the server at this exact moment. Are you putting your creative talents into any other games? No, I'm not. I don't have time for games at all much anymore recently with the work I've been doing. I barely even have time to get on the Heroes Academy server. So, no. That was simple. The other day, my paper ran Leo, a comic they have not carried for a few years now. When I looked at it more closely to see if it was back, the title said Get Fuzzy by Darby Conley. Sure enough, Get Fuzzy was not printed that day, and Leo was in the exact same space the comic should have been. What happened, and did it happen in your paper as well? Well, my paper doesn't carry Leo to begin with in the first place, so I'm afraid I really don't know much of what you're talking about there, but I am in contact with Mark Tutuli every once in a while. He's a completely awesome dude, and I'll see if maybe he knows what's going up. He's a good friend of Darby Conley's, I know, and they've been known to, cartoonists have been known to sort of play an April Fool's Day prank on each other every once in a while, where they'll pull a switcheroo on each other to fool the audience. It's actually a pretty clever idea and requires a whole lot of pre-planning and coordination on the parts of everyone involved. Maybe it was something like that. Off the top of my head, though, I can't say. How has your comic section changed over the years? This is actually a really tough one to answer because I can only remember how it's changed the past couple of years. And before that, it's more or less been the same for a very long while. The biggest change, though, is that it's not called the comics section anymore. It's called the diversions section, because it also carries things like Dear Abby, horoscopes, crossword puzzles, jumbles, and other things of that nature. So it's not just the comics section. It's probably only about 2/3 the comics section at most, which is kind of something that annoys me, but I can understand why they're doing that, because it's not entirely the comics section. But I remember a couple years back, Cul-de-sac and Mutts were both added to my comic section, and about a year later, not even a year later, about 6 months later, Richard Thompson, who draws Cul-de-sac, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and sadly had to step down and stop doing the strip. So then Cul-de-sac got pulled, and I was kind of anxious to see what strip they would put in Cul-de-sac's place, and they proceeded to put exactly nothing in to replace Cul-de-sac, which really, really made me mad for a little while. But eventually I just kind of moved on because there's not much I could do. I emailed the editors and I never got a response back. So those are the only changes that I can really remember happening with my newspaper. Is there a comic or a TV show or movie based on a comic that could be better with a few changes? Yes, there are plenty of those, and I'm not going to go into them here because that's the idea behind the comic strip Doctor, who is going to be making a future appearance soon. I like the idea a whole lot when I did it with my Beetle Bailey episode, and there's a whole lot of other comics that I want to do it too, because I feel it's a more constructive way of dealing with comics that I don't like. You know, rather than just saying, this is bad, and I don't like this because of this and this and this, I can say, well, okay, I don't think this works very well, so how can we take it and make it work? I don't know if any of the cartoonists who, you know, do those comic strips will actually do anything, but at least it provides a better alternative, I think, to provide constructive criticism rather than just straightforward, this is bad, bashing of a work, which is something that I'm trying to do more of in the future. So there's plenty of comics that can be changed, and that's what the comic strip Doctor is for, and there is a comic strip Doctor planned for the future. I won't say about what strip it is yet, but it is one of the comics here on my row of books over here, which is not all my books, for the record. What was your favorite time when comics have done a crossover? Those are actually really, really hard to keep track of. I remember hearing about a great big April Fool's Day switcheroo done by like 20 different cartoonists back in, I think, 2004? I'm not entirely sure. But I don't remember that one much at all. But recently I know that a lot of weird people have been popping up in Dick Tracy. They never said exactly who it was, but Popeye basically all but made an appearance in Dick Tracy, which I thought was hilarious. And this one was also interesting. For like one panel, the Penguin from Batman showed up. Like, officially, the Penguin is a part of the Dick Tracy universe, which means that Dick Tracy and Batman, at least, you know, in that world, you know, share a world together. Dick Tracy and Batman live in the same world, which is actually really interesting, and I don't think they're ever going to actually explore it, but it's you know, the implications and the possibilities just explode when you think of something like that. So that's very cool, I think. What's the best or worst video game based on a comic? The tricky part with that is I can only remember two off the top of my head, and I know there's more. I know there's been like a dozen Garfield games and lots of Snoopy games or Peanuts games, but I remember a Garfield platformer for the Sega Genesis where he got caught in a TV and got like shuffled through different TV channels, and I barely remember it at all. I remember seeing it when I was like 7 or 8. I'm going to see if I can try and track a copy down at some point, because it's still my Sega Genesis in this cabinet, actually. And I remember it, you know, I was only 7 or 8 at the time, so I might think of it completely differently now. But I remember at the time being actually okay and competent. It was very similar to, I think, Vector Man, if you've ever played that. You could move around the D-pad. It was one button to jump, one button for a melee attack, and one button for Garfield to throw objects at his enemies. That's all the game was. Pretty straightforward, but you know, I think it could have been very simple. And the other one is one that my cousins have over on their Xbox 360. It's Charlie Brown and Snoopy and the whole Peanuts game. Dogfighting, as in, you know, aerial dogfighting adventure. So they would, you know, appear in their planes, and Snoopy would, of course, be flying the doghouse. They would fly around and shoot each other, and it was okay. You know, it was a downloadable indie level arcade game, but it was fun. It was okay. I don't think that either of those games would ever be remembered as, you know, outstanding, you must buy this game of the year sort of things, but they were fun in their own right. Do you think comics today still have appeal to young readers? A few years ago, I heard a story claiming that comics no longer drew in young readers and that manga titles could start appearing in papers. Now, years later, that plan seems to have been abandoned. Still, the question remains, are comics targeting the new generation well, or are they still written to appeal to older people? This is a big, complex, multi-part question that, honestly, I'm going to go over briefly here, and then I might spend a special episode just going over it. Because the changing face of the comics industry is something that's hugely important these days, because the world is shifting from an analog age where comics only appeared in newspapers to a more digital one. Because, you know, if you ask, you know, older people, not old people, where they get their news from, they're gonna say, they're more likely to say a newspaper. If you were to go into a senior citizen village, a retirement village, and ask them where they get their news, those people are more likely to say, I read the newspaper. If you were to ask, say, a high schooler, where do you get your news from? They're going to say, I get mine from, CNN.com or FoxNews.com or HuffingtonPost.com. They're less likely to actually pick up newspapers and magazines. And since they're more likely to do it digitally, the digital newspapers don't carry the comics, whereas the actual print newspapers do. And so the newspaper industry is in a very interesting sort of state now. And as for the idea here of manga titles appearing in newspapers, I really am trying not to be mean-spirited when I say this, but that's an absolutely laughable idea, because the average manga volume contains what, like 20, 30 plus pages per individual thing. So the amount of space, space, paper, ink, and resources that would have to be spent to get all those things in probably would not be economically, feasible or attractive to the newspapers who publish those, because it wouldn't attract in the audience they were wanting to. It would be too high a cost for too little return is essentially the point there. And it's not that I have anything against manga, I really don't, but from a pure economic standpoint of being a newspaper publisher, newspaper editor, that's not something that they would ever consider, because just the amount of material that would need to be published on a daily basis would make it a very unattractive idea to them. So are comics appealing to young readers? In the actual newspapers, I don't think as much. But in the digital age, when you can find them all on Go Comics and not Daily Ink anymore, because Daily Ink changed to the Comics Kingdom, there's still an audience there, and there's still comics that are making waves and getting huge. Comics like Heavenly Nostrils, like Retail, like Zen Pencils, if you haven't heard of that one. Zen Pencils is blowing up this year. So there's still an audience out there for comics. Of course, the whole world of webcomics, Sluggy Freelance, XKCD, Penny Arcade, those are huge comics. So comics, the medium itself is not going anywhere, but it's shifting. It's sort of evolving from one thing into another thing, and that's a very interesting thing to watch. And it's scaring a lot of people. I'll spend a lot more time going over this more in depth in a special episode at some point in the future. So that's something I'm actually really looking forward to discussing. What comic do you find hard to talk about because it doesn't have a lot to say about it? I don't really have a comic that I can't talk about, because every comic you can find something to talk about, even if it's just there's nothing to talk about. Because you just find it, over the course of a year, you find 365 comics. You're going to find something to talk about in at least one of those, something worth talking about, some loose string that's worth grabbing onto and pulling and unraveling it mentally to see, is there something more interesting that could come out of this? As an example here, my dad and I disagree very heavily on The Born Loser, and I think it's still a strip that could, go places if it were to take more risks, but it's just another family sitcom strip with no unique spin on it. A whole lot of family sitcom strips these days have some unique theme. The Family Circus is very much, a Leave It to Beaver, Norman Rockwell style, very 1950s-esque strip. Jumpstart kind of explores an inner city African-American perspective, so on and so forth. So the very ordinary, run-of-the-mill, mild milquetoast, completely personality-less strips, there's still something to be found there. You just have to find out what it is. Born Loser, I think, like, for example, just going back to the Born Loser because that's the example I was using, takes place in the 60s. Well, or the 50s or 60s, and it will be interesting to examine, say, a father's, a conservative baby boomer father's relationship with his aging hippie son, for instance. There could be a lot of humor to be drawn for something like that, something very much in the vein of Zits, but with more of a counterculture aspect that could be brought to the table. And I'm just coming up with this stuff on the top of my head after, just 4 minutes of thinking about this with no planning whatsoever. There's something to be found in every single comic if you look for it, is, I guess, the point I'm trying to make here. Why do comic artists so frequently draw TVs with rabbit ears, cameras with large flashbulbs, rotary dial phones, and clocks with the hands pointing at 3 o'clocks? Well, it's very simple. Those are iconic items that everybody knows what they are. If you're trying to talk about a phone, for instance, a phone and a camera and a TV, Nowadays, they all look the same, and that doesn't make for a visually distinctive thing, because if you see a comics character going like this, well, you don't know what they're doing. Are they taking a picture? Are they watching something? You don't know what they're doing, so typically speaking, it's because they're trying to keep things, easily identifiable to the reader. Now, as to why they don't use modern day TVs, for example, well, some comics are set in old times, and other times it's because a cartoonist is from an older time period when we still use the TVs that were, this thick from screen to back. And they've never evolved their style. There are some that are changing, that are evolving. Heavenly Nostrils, I know, uses iPhones a lot, actually. Retail, there was actually a storyline where Marla switched out her old CRT TV for a modern day plasma or LCD flat screen. So it's changing. As new talent's brought in, we will see these changes in technology eventually, but it's a medium, at least in newspaper comics, that's very slow to catch on to these things like this. But there are updates found some places. Blondie uses an iMac to run her catering business now, I believe. What do you wish was a comic? And also, what comic would you like to see rebooted? I'm putting these two questions together because it's very simple. I want to see an adventure comic again. I guess Prince Valiant and Mandrake the Magician actually run in some places somewhere, but for the life of me, if you know what papers run those, tell me, because I would love to see what place still runs them. But more than anything else, I would love to see the return of Flash Gordon, because he's the original. He inspired Star Wars. The reason why we have Star Wars is because George Lucas wanted to make a Flash Gordon movie, and he couldn't get the rights to it. So he said, okay, I'll just make a movie that's basically a lot like Flash Gordon, but differently, and that's how we got Star Wars. So having a Flash Gordon comic strip come back, I think could be really interesting to see what could be done with it with a modern perspective, with modern new talent. That could be really cool, and I would love to see another adventure comic come back. Until then, though, we're left with entirely comedy, which is fine, but it'd be nice to see some variety. Also, I think it'd be really interesting. I don't think it could ever happen in the newspaper comics, but it'd be really, really interesting to see a horror comic. Because believe it or not, you wouldn't get any sense of this from what I have around me, but I love horror stuff. And there's a difference between horror and slasher. Things like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, those are slasher movies, but I'm talking genuine horror like The Grudge, and I actually really, really love the Slender Man mythos a lot. I would love to see what could be done with a horror comic. It could never happen because people would complain that it's scaring their kids and then they would get pulled, but it could be, I just think, it would be a really interesting idea to see. Who are your favorite web critics? Well, of course, I love the Nostalgia Critic. I absolutely love the guy. He has been knocking it out of the park ever since he came back in January. I love his reviews. I love his editorials sometimes even more than his reviews, and I am really enjoying what he's done with the crew from Demo Reel that he's kept on board. I'm glad he did that because it opens up a world of possibilities for him to do. It's just great to see the King come back, I think, in top form. And yes, I know some of you don't like him as much as you used to. I still like him. I also really like Todd in the Shadows. I don't know how on earth it could ever happen, but if I could cross over with Todd, that would be really fun. The problem is, I'm not sure where the overlap for us to review anything would be. Unless we were to do, theme songs from cartoon TV shows? There's not much there. I also am a huge, huge fan of, as you might have guessed from my own Counter Monkey video that was ill-received, the Spoonie one. I chose this set, actually, initially, because it reminded me of the Spoonie 1 set. I liked his Highlander series. He introduced me to the Ultima series, and I loved his Ultima retrospective. And I just think the guy's absolutely hilarious. And last but not least, actually I shouldn't say last because I got like a couple others. I love Jim Sterling and Movie Bob on The Escapist, and I actually really, really admire Yahtzee Croshaw because I love what he does with his animations. And if he hadn't come up with the idea, I would love to do those things myself because it's so much fun to see how he takes the things that he talks about in his games and then interact with them. You'll see him actually like talking to or yelling at the game itself, at like the box of a video game. I just think that's such a cool and clever idea. I wish I'd thought of it or started sooner, but I like all those guys. And my last review that I want to talk about is one that I have a very sort of interesting opinion of, I guess. The funny thing is, I rarely actually watch Atop the Fourth Wall. For some reason, I just find it really difficult to sit through an entire episode, and I have no clue why, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But I love, the personality of Linkara, and I guess he's built up a sort of cult of personality, because I know there are other people out there who follow him on Twitter, who watches other videos like Longbox the Damned and History of the Power Rangers and things like that, who don't watch Atop the Fourth Wall. But I follow him on Twitter, I follow him on Tumblr, I love interacting with the dude whenever the chance to do so, whenever, a little bit of a crossover could happen. I'd love to do a crossover with him at some point too, because I know that there's a Garfield comic book out there. There used to be a Beetle Bailey comic book. Perfect opportunity. So if you somehow are seeing this and you want to do a crossover with me, please, by all means, hit me up. I would love to do it. So those are my favorite web critics out there. But probably the ones I draw the most inspiration from when it comes to writing the punchline are the Nostalgia Critic, Todd in the Shadows, and occasionally Jim Sterling of the Jimquisition, who I know are all mostly different to me in that they're much more foul-mouthed than I am. I made it a point early on, I'm going to keep this show family-friendly, because it's kind of a reflection of the medium I talk about. Comics are not foul-mouthed, and so I think it kind of makes sense to stay true to the original medium. And it also just means that, more people can enjoy it. You can sit down and watch it with your kid, with your grandma. Anybody can watch this, and not have to worry about saying, now, I know this guy swears a lot, but trust me, he's really funny. That's something I want to avoid very specifically, very early on. Got any fan art? I have 2 pieces of fan art up there. One was drawn for me on someone, I believe they're 3DS, and the other was drawn by one of the contributors over at Manic Expression. So very cool. But if you want to draw any more fan art of me, by all means, go ahead. I like to think I've given you a distinctive enough outfit here to draw. I'm actually wondering if this counts as fan art or as official art, but, there's also my appearance in retail, of course. I guess that kind of counts as fan art, because Norm Feudy, I know, enjoys my videos from time to time. So I guess I have 3 pieces of fan art. Would you ever think about talking about comics that have ended? For better or for worse? That's one of my favorite slice-of-life comics that I always read over and over again. Well, I have already talked about comics that have ended. Calvin and Hobbes has ended, Inkpen has ended, Flash Gordon has ended, and I do plan on talking about other comics that have ended too, Peanuts. I'm gonna get around to Peanuts someday, I promise you. It's one of the biggest comics and most influential in the world. There's no way I can ignore it forever. So yes, and For Better or For Worse is another one that's on my to-do list. I remember my newspaper used to carry that one a number of years back as well, but it got dropped eventually. And I do remember when I was younger thinking that it was a decent strip. Not bad. I just can't remember enough to say if it was actually good or not, so I'm just going to say I enjoyed it when I read it originally. If you like For Better or For Worse, then I think you'll also enjoy Sally Forth. It's a strip that's very similar, I think. If you don't know Sally Forth, I think it's on ComicsKingdom.com. Go check it out. Have you read the webcomic Questionable Content? No, I have not, but now it is definitely on my to-do list. What if we have comics that we created that we want you to review? I won't guarantee anything. If you want to send something to me and talk with me about it, I'd be happy to do so. My schedule's really busy at the moment, and I might not get around to it for a long while, and I don't want to, say anything about it in public if you'd be uncomfortable with it, but if you want to talk in private, I'm open to the idea right now. No guarantees on anything, but I'm open to discuss it with you, sure. What are your favorite movies and TV shows? My favorite movie of all time is Pixar's Up. I just think it's a masterpiece of filmmaking. Character design is great, the colors are great, music is outstanding, and the storyline is sublime. I will never ever get tired of watching it. So my other favorite movies include The Dark Knight. I really enjoy the entire Lord of the Rings series, which is one movie, not a trilogy. You gotta watch it pretty much all in one sitting for the full experience. And my favorite TV shows are Whose Line Is It Anyway? I adore Whose Line Is It Anyways? I love that show to death. And I also really enjoyed 24. My whole family got hooked on the show, actually. We have all 8 seasons and we love every single one of them. Except Season 6. Because Season 6 was fairly lackluster. But those are my 2 favorite TV shows. 24, Whose Line Is It Anyway? If Vincent van Gogh was alive today, would he prefer Coke Pepsi or Mountain Dew? Mountain Dew? I guess I don't like any of those drinks, so I have no opinion. Mountain Dew, because go would do the do. Go do the do. Go would do the do. Sure, why not? That sounds good. How am I supposed to know the answer to that question? Have you ever read Japanese 4-koma or 4-panel manga? I admit I haven't. I have barely heard of it, but it sounds similar to what was done in the very early days of Mega Tokyo, which had a 2x2 style of panel layouts. So if you know of any place where I could read those in English translation, because I can speak absolutely zero Japanese, I'd be willing to take a look at it. It could be very interesting, but at the moment, no I don't. Do you like any small press comics? Again, I have to admit I really don't know anything about small press comics. I don't know where to find them, I don't know what any of them are, but if you were to point me in the direction of a couple and recommend a couple to me, I'd be more than willing to check them out. And I would love to broaden my horizons and read some more comics some more. Sure. You got a magic gun. Where'd you purchase that? Magic gun? I don't have a magic gun. I've got a magic sword. Wait, when did I get a magic sword? What 3 internet reviewers would you like to collaborate with the most? Well, I'm going to be completely unoriginal and shoot here for the big guys, but hey, if you're going to dream, dream big, and the punchline's certainly bigger than I ever thought it would be. 1. The Nostalgia Critic. I would love to talk about with him either of the Garfield movies, or maybe Marmaduke. Any one of those could be so much fun for him to look at. I would also love to, of course, my other American comic reviewer, Linkara. We could talk about the Garfield comic book or the Beetle Bailey comic book, because I know that there was a Beetle Bailey comic book available in I think the 60s or 70s. Any one of those, fits in perfectly with our respective media. We could have a lot of fun with that. And interestingly enough, just hear me out, the Spoonie one. I know that Spoonie and I are a whole lot different. I know that we don't really have much crossover in the way of what we review, but I think he would be the sort of person who would review the Flash Gordon movie from 1980. And, it seemed like the sort of thing that he would be really into. So if he ever wanted to review the Flash Gordon movie, Spoonie, please, by all means, hunt me down. I will endure your raging audience that hates anything that's not you. So those 3 guys, of course, the 3 big ones, because if you're gonna dream, if you're gonna be stupid and go big, be really stupid and go really big. If you had your choice of comic strip to guest star in, what would it be? I already got it! Retail's my absolute favorite comic that I've discovered since I started the show and in general. If you had to pick a comic that I haven't appeared in yet, I would love to somehow make an appearance in Foxtrot, because Foxtrot's one of my other favorite comics when I was a young kid, and Billiman's work still holds up really, really well after all these years. And I know he does Sunday strips still, so if by chance I could somehow appear in a Foxtrot comic, yeah, I'd be a very happy kid. Do you remember the comic strip April Fool's Switcheroo in 1997? If you did, what was your favorite comic strip in the Switcheroo? I remember hearing about it. We were talking about this earlier this very episode. 1997, that's what it was. And I remember hearing about it. I just don't remember what all the comics involved were and how they switched around, but that I could probably devote an entire episode to that, just looking at that. And that's about all I have to say. I don't remember it, so I can't remember what my favorite one was. If you could talk to just one comic strip character for only 5 minutes, who would it be and why? Probably Cooper from Retail, because I got a lot in common with Cooper. I can kind of see Cooper as an audience surrogate for myself. He's a retail worker. He's very creative. I think he and I would just have a ton of fun together, I hope. Failing that, I'd also really like to talk to, Calvin's on the list. Gotta love my man Calvin. Those are probably my top 2 choices though, Cooper and Calvin. Although I think Fraz could probably be really interesting to talk to too, the main character from the comic strip Fraz. So there's some interesting ones out there, and any one of them I would love to just hang out and talk with, but Cooper's probably number 1 on my list. Have you still considered doing a video of Lisa's story after your Funky Winker Bean review? Lisa's story is complex and difficult to review because of how intimate a subject matter it is, not just by virtue of it being a storyline about something as serious and difficult as cancer, but because Tom Baddock was inspired to write it when he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And so to review something that's so deeply close to one's own personal soul is a daunting task for something like that, and I don't know if I could do it properly. When I did my initial Funky Winker Bean video, I was much younger and much more naive compared to what I was now, compared to what I am now. I've learned more from meeting cartoonists, from talking to cartoonists on a one-on-one basis, from appearing at retail, from talking to people at King Features and at Andrews McNeil. And if you missed the video from my interview with Tom Baddock himself, that approaching Lisa's story is something that would still be very interesting to do, certainly, and it's not something that I am opposed to doing, but if I do it, I want to do it right. So if it's a difficult topic for me to tackle, and I can't handle it like I could a normal view. I can't handle it the way I do, something like Garfield, or like Heavenly Nostrils, or Mama, or Retail. It's something that's very, very different, and something that's incredibly difficult for me to look at in that way. So that's where I stand on Lisa's story. I have read it, I do have an opinion on it, but I don't want to say it here and bungle it up. So my honest recommendation is, if you're not sure what to think about Lisa's story, then go check it out yourself. Some people might like it, some people might really, really dislike it, some people might find solace and comfort in it. I really do mean that. So if you're not sure what to think of it, then you check it out for yourself. Your own opinion is much different than mine. My opinion is mine, your opinion is yours. If you like something that I don't like, fine. Enjoy what you like. Do you plan to take a look at any other past storylines from certain comics like you did with Garfield's Halloween? Sure, well, technically I did it with Calvin and Hobbes because that strip was 20 plus years old when it ran. I looked at Flash Gordon, and I would love to go back and I know that there was a Star Wars comic at one point. There was a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic, a Rugrats comic, a Doctor Who comic. Those would all be so much fun to take a look at from past archives and see how comics were in the past. And if I could find them somewhere, I'd also really, really love to take a look at some old Pogo comics or some old Dick Tracy or Little Orphan Annie comics. Those would all be so much fun to look at. The old comics from the 60s or the 40s or the 20s and see how much different they are, just to see what they were like then as opposed to now. That would be so cool to look at, I think. If you hate Garfield, why do you have a couple of Garfield's books? Because I got them way before I started ever doing the show. I got them when I was a little kid and still forming my initial opinion on him, and because I have Garfield books for the same reason that the Nostalgia Critic owns The Room, or the same reason that Spoonie owns Ultima 9, or the same reason that Linkara owns One More Day, because I think it's important for us in some capacity to have what we're actually talking about. And I know I get a lot of my stuff digitally, but a lot of my stuff I don't. And besides, it just looks better on camera anyways to be able to actually hold up what you're talking about and talk about it than to just have it appear as a floating graphic all the time. And also, some of these are donations. Oh, actually about half of these, every comic from about here to here are donations from some of my friends. When I first started up the Punchline, and it included this Garfield book and a triple pack here. So that's part of why I have a number of Garfield books. How many comic books / collections do you have? How many? Well, I got a lot. Let me do the math over here. Not counting these big multiple book collections, I have... One. Really? I had no idea I had that many. I thought it was in the mid-30s. I apparently have 51, but I am not counting my duplicate copy of Weirdos from Another Planet. I have no idea how I wound up with 2, but I somehow have 2 of these. Now, a lot of these are reprints. I just got the complete Calvin and Hobbes over here, for instance, which makes a lot of my other Calvin and Hobbes books sort of redundant to own. but of individual books, I have 51, 52 if you count this sucker twice. I had no idea I had so many, actually. What are the comic strips that run in your newspaper? Well, I've been saving up a number of them. Let's just go straight down the list, shall we? Sally Forth, Jumpstart, Crankshaft, The Born Loser, Hager the Horrible, or my paper actually only calls it Hager now. Not Hager the Horrible, just Hager. Blondie, Beetle Bailey, Mary Worth, Free Range, Speed Bump, Marmaduke, Get Fuzzy, The Wizard of Id, Judge Parker, Peanuts, Family Circus, Bizarro, The Amazing Spider-Man, Non Sequitur, Rhymes with Orange, Pearls Before Swine, Prickly City, Doonesbury, Zitz, Garfield, Dilbert, almost done, Fraz, Funky Winkerbean, Real Life Adventures, Mutts, and last but certainly not least, The Pajama Diaries. There are a couple others that appear on Sunday only. For example, Baby Blues only appears in my Sunday paper, which I think is a crime, because Baby Blues is a great strip. But that's what my paper, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, runs. What comic do you dislike just as much or more than Garfield? There are a couple out there. I think that Mama is, from a purely objective standpoint of just artistic quality, is actually somehow even worse than Garfield. And Croc is also, I just find, also a really, really bad strip. But I can't get worked up about those as much because they don't have the impact on society that Garfield does, which is really my big problem. Is Garfield has such a huge impact on the world of comics and cartooning, and he's essentially doing nothing. That's my big problem with him. If you had to read one, what would it be and why? I think the question here is asking if I had to read a comic that I disliked, what would it be? Or it's asking me if I could only read one comic, what would it be? So I'll answer both of those. If I had to read a comic that I disliked, I would much rather prefer to read Croc over Mama, because Croc at least has some interesting storylines that could, unravel and be spawned from your own head. It's about, I think, a group of British soldiers in the Middle East during the 1910s, I want to say. My history is very poor in that particular chunk of history. It's the same time period where, like, the Mummy movies took period. So that sort of time period, but without any of the supernatural, crazy, reviving pharaohs stuff. So Croc would probably be. The other thing is, if you could only read one comic for the rest of your life, what would it be? And that, of course, would be the master himself. That'd be Calvin and Hobbes. I just got this for Christmas, and it's actually really heavy. Wow. Okay. Do you plan to go to any more cons in 2014? Well, I would like to. I don't have any current plans to go to any at the moment. I know that a lot of people, a lot of reviewers, a whole lot of fans are going to be going to MagFest, which is right around the corner. I won't be going because I can't afford to spend the money or time right now, but some year I'm going to go. I promise you I'm going to go to MagFest some year. And also I know that my friend, and I guess you could sort of call my boss over at Channel Zero, Eric Chozo Ninpo Wright, keeps inviting me to all these events down in Florida. I live in Ohio, man. That's a plane ticket for each event you're inviting me to. I would love to go, but I don't have the money right now, so buy me a plane ticket and we'll see what comes up. But at the moment, I don't have anything definitely planned, but if I could go back to Animarathon or PandoraCon, I would love to go to those events, because I had a great time there. I got to meet some cool people, I got to run a couple panels and learn how those work, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to run a completely awesome con panel, but I'm gonna get there. Do you plan to do more comic strip doctor episodes? Yes, I want to do way more comic strip doctor episodes. I want to talk about comics that I've already covered for the comic strip doctor. I want to talk about comics that I haven't talked about yet for the comic strip doctor. I think that's a really interesting idea, and I'm glad I came up with it. So you have not seen the last The Comic Strip Doctor. He's going to be making, hopefully, a lot more appearances in the future. If Hobbes' head was used as a power source for the Cyberman head, what would the end result be? Glitchy, probably. I imagine that his fuzz would act as a sort of thermal clog or thermal heat sink to build up head inside the Cyberman's head and essentially overload the circuitry by overheating. I think that's what the proper response is. What's a paladin? Well, I don't think I'm a paladin because I really can't envision a paladin carrying this giant thing around. I don't know where I got it from. Where did I purchase that? Is there a strip you like that everyone else seems to hate? Not really. There is one. Well, I can't say I like it outright, but I'm willing to give it a chance more than a whole lot of other people are, and that's actually Funky Winkerbean. My interview with Tom Baddock let me see a lot of comics, the entire industry and medium in general, in a new light, and I was thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with him. And I give every comic strip I read now a fair shake to try and impress me. Every single one. Does it always succeed? No. But there are a lot of websites out there that are dedicated solely to making fun or hating on Funky Winkerbean, and I actually avoid those communities because they're absolutely toxic. I mean it. You know, when I do, if I ever do a review of Lisa's story, they're probably going to hate me just for the fact that I don't outright hate Lisa's story. Anything short of that, they're gonna rain blows on me on. But yeah, that's the thing is, you know, there are a lot of people there who really don't like Funky Winkerbean, and I'm willing to give it a fair shake. It doesn't work all the time. I can't say that I ever like it, but I at least respect the fact that it's trying to do something different than just be a comedy strip. I don't want to go any further on that then, because there's a whole other mess. There's a whole comic strip doctor episode in the wings for that. Are there any legacy/zombie strips you think are either still good or better than the original creator? Well, actually, there are two, and they're the only two zombie strips that I've liked so far. The one is Dick Tracy, which I think is a ton of fun to read. The artwork is still absolutely outstanding, and the storylines are a little cheesy, a little bit like an 80s cartoon in how, you know, simple and silly they are, but they're a ton of fun to read. And much the same in terms of both the artwork and the writing can be said of Ginger Meggs. Jason Chatfield is actually really taking charge of what Ginger is as an entity and a website. I really admire what he's doing. So those two strips are both still very much worth your time reading. And I would love to see, like I said earlier, it's technically not a zombie strip and I don't have a collection up here. I had to look for one. A Flash Gordon cartoon or comic reboot, I think could still be a ton of fun if it was done right. Oh, a modern day Flash Gordon done by modern day people. Oh, I love the idea. I really do. What is your idea for an original comic? That's a difficult one, actually. I would like to see an adventure comic / horror comic. One where the monsters or villains that the hero would be facing would definitely be scarier than what we usually see. You know, he'd be fighting off against, you know, Lovecraftian monsters, for instance, but he, defying Lovecraft, would come out on top and would win. You know, maybe people might say, oh, you're violating Lovecraft's ideas, or oh, that could never run. I know that, but, you know, it's my own personal idea. So if I were ever to start up a webcomic with my atrocious art skills, that's what I would want to do somehow. And there we go. That, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our 2013 edition of the Punchlines Mailbag. Thank you so much for sending in your questions. They were actually really enjoyable to read. It's so nice to know that people have so many different comics from all different spectrums of life and across the globe that they enjoy. They actually help me to sort of go on a little bit of an introspective time to see what I want to do with the show and what I want from comics. So thank you so much for sending in your questions. Thank you so much for an enjoyable episode. The top 5 comics of 2013 will be coming before the end of the year. Thanks for your time.